You're listening to Mentoring Developers. I wanted to ask you about how you keep your skills up to date. I know that you do a ton of reading, you do a lot of research, and you're dabbling into programming, iPhone development, and you have client work, which is not related to this. And I mean, you have a busy life. How do you keep your skills up to date?
Yeah, I would say I'm probably not that unique, in regards to trying to keep these things up to date. I do probably have a little bit more time, available to me as a consultant than I have if I was doing from 9 to 5. So what I'll end up doing is that I'm probably like lynda.com's like biggest user. So even though, there's all sorts of great sources, but and lynda.com is obviously a robust one that people have known about for a long time. But that is, to me, is just endlessly fascinating, is that you can just tap into a set of, tutorials and screencasts to pick up anything. Anecdotally, it's probably easiest to talk about the fact that, so say for instance, even just this last weekend, I've had enough like PHP knowledge. I was able to kind of like build my website, which again is fairly static. There's really nothing going on. It's all that interesting. It's mostly a series of PHP includes. But I wanted to start playing around with an application that I've been kind of toying with, kind of like a document management app. And, something like a lynda.com can spawn like the basic knowledge of like PHP, in terms of connecting with databases and things like that. And within a matter of hours, you can have a functional knowledge. I mean, again, nothing, professionally viable like you or your audiences would be able to put together. But again, it's enough for me to kind of, engage into something and kind of learn some of the ins and outs, of dealing with one particular type of language. And then that generally then ends up just spawning me to start just Googling the heck out of stuff, so it's like I run into something and I don't know what it is and I find something on Stack Overflow, or something along that lines, that type of, I'm trying to think about like a more articulate way to refer to it, but it's like almost like task-based learning. And I think you had mentioned it, in a really great podcast you had done recently. I think it was with Derek Bailey, and you talked about this kind of like just-in-time learning is that a lot of that type of stuff, really resonates with me too, because it's like I do love picking up a book and reading it from cover to cover, but often for a lot of things which I don't necessarily personally have a whole lot of knowledge with in terms of a lot of development languages, I often find that if I'm trying to build something, that's the thing that kind of gets me into learning something is that I'm trying to take care of a particular task, and it allows me to kind of at least again ferret out, enough knowledge to be able to build something and take a look at it and see if it's worth anybody's time.
That's a really good point. And as you mentioned, the just-in-time learning idea is that you only learn the thing that you need right now. And you don't learn for the sake of learning. And I've done both.
Mm-hmm.
I love to learn. So I often learn for the sake of learning because I'm so curious. I just want to know.
Yeah.
But I know that it takes a toll on my time and my own sanity. And
Agreed.
Sometimes I don't do that. I then learn as I need to learn. If I'm building a type of website, if I need authentication for that, then I learn how to do authentication.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, that shouldn't be my concern, simply because I can't possibly learn everything, right?
Huge wealth of, things for us to tap into. And I think, every human being has that challenge, in their life is that, I think there are people that are inherently more curious than others, but I think most folks are just like, you really do run into a situation where there just isn't enough time, to be able to learn everything you want. I mean, I often, and I don't know if this would resonate with you at all, but what I try to end up doing is almost kind of like triage it in a way, is to say, there's things I have to do to kind of keep my lights on, as a consultant. And that, is kind of more of like the, following up with industry leaders and kind of knowing what, frankly, trends are and the different kind of, lexical conventions that people are using to kind of describe, what they do. All that type of stuff is like maybe like a first level. The second is kind of what we're talking about, like this kind of just-in-time learning, like trying to solve particular tasks. But in a third way, it's like what I'll end up trying to find is that with this whole exercise of me writing a book recently, is that I'll just pick up something which I'm weak at, but I've always been interested in. So like I picked up a book about economics a while ago, and was learning about Vilfredo Pareto, and like it's the guy that kind of created the 80-20 rule, and like the whole background behind that type of information was really fascinating to me. And that's a form of learning, but it was actually, as you mentioned, you can get exhausted if all you're learning is just doing what's kind of keeping your lights on. and some people are better at it than myself, but it's like, I think that there's this kind of way that you can kind of find these kind of various levels of learning where you're like, okay, this is the type of learning which is kind of keeping me gainfully employed. This is the stuff I need to do, kind of get my projects done. And then there's this third level, which I think, people can be a little bit looser about and just find topics, that are interesting to them, but don't necessarily contribute to the first two. Can be kind of a way of kind of keeping that momentum up. Because I am a big believer in the fact is that you build up momentum, I think, for learning a lot of times. And if you're used to picking up a book every week or two, it's a lot easier to kind of keep that going than not do that type of stuff or not watch tutorials or whatever it is. So if you kind of keep that as a regular, almost like exercise regime, it allows you, I think, to get through a lot more material. But that's maybe just a personal belief.
Oh, that's an excellent point. You have to schedule this learning. It's not just going to happen.
True.
If you, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about it in general, someone says that in my free time, quote unquote, I will learn X, then there's a very strong possibility that you will never have free time.
Agreed.
Because if free time means that I'm not doing anything, then I don't have any time because I'm always doing something. Even if I'm watching TV, I'm doing something and I'm not free. But if it's in my schedule, if I say that before I go to bed, 1 hour before I go to bed, I do this thing. I read a book, for example. Then that becomes a task for me. It's not my free time anymore. It's work. And if you treat learning as work, then you'll be in a position where you will, over time, accumulate all of this learning that seems impossible. But imagine doing that for a whole month. Now you have 1 hour a day for 30 days. You have 30 hours of learning. That's incredible. Yeah. And I did that. I did that kind of stuff for many years. Before I had kids, it was much easier.
I can imagine, yeah.
And I was obsessed with learning because I felt like I needed to catch up to a lot of other people that I followed, and it was tiring and it was grueling, but it was really good for me. And I really enjoyed it at the end because I could look back and just see all of the different books I'd read. I would read a ton of books. And the other thing that I think we need to learn is not only that I need to, for example, if I am a Java developer or I want to be a Java developer, then I say that, okay, I'm going to pick up a book on Java and I'm going to read it. Or I'm going to go through a blog series, a tutorial, and I'm going to go through it, and that's my learning. There's life beyond that. So you think you're talking about something else. You're saying that, yes, you have to learn to keep the lights on, but you also have to learn other things to broaden your perspective, just to also give you, this breadth of knowledge. And the other thing is that you need to learn how to learn, or what to learn, actually. For example, in this web development as an example, every 6 months, every year, the technology landscape changes. New languages, new frameworks come out, new tools, new tool chains. It's an unending, I want to call it a roller coaster ride, but I'm not even sure if it's a roller coaster. I think it just keeps going up. So it's the question is, how do I know what I should learn, right? If I know, for example, let's say that I'm a CSS expert and I learn everything there is to learn about CSS, and in new version of CSS comes out, then I'm on top of it. Great. I can certainly do that. But should I learn Sass? I don't know. What is Sass? Maybe I don't know what it is. And maybe I don't know if there's something even better on the horizon. Maybe I don't know if I should be learning a different set of technologies, techniques, ideas that I am not aware of. And so I think so. A lot of people that I know and admire, they talk about having this tunnel vision and being really focused, because when you're focused, you can go deep, and that is true. But you also need to go wide. So you have an idea of what's going on. What are the new developments? A lot of times, what's new is also better. It's not always true, but most of the time it is true. And new things come out and they catch on because they provide something that didn't exist before, and generally it's an improvement. So I need to stay on top of what everybody's doing, maybe at a very cursory level, and then go deep into one or two things, so then I have some depth of knowledge, especially in your case, because you are a consultant. You are expected to be an expert, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, it would be generous to call me an expert, if anything. I mean, there's kind of a saying around, it's not specifically with UX, but it's like the idea of being able to sell your ignorance, which is like, it's not the idea that I'm going to walk into a situation and know a solution, but I'm going to know a set of skills to get to that solution, right? Because at that point, and I'm not saying it has a one-to-one equivalency with what you were just talking about in terms of like, web scripting languages and such, but my guess, and again, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's like, there is something we're saying that, once you end up build up kind of a body of knowledge, these things are you taking on a new programming language or something new going on with Ruby, for instance. You're going to be able to essentially hit that ground running, based off your current knowledge, where somebody such as myself it would take potentially years, to develop that level of aptitude to kind of be able to embrace those new things. So again, I don't want to sound repetitive, but it's like, I really think it is kind of a matter of just managing that kind of cadence where you talked about, is to say like, it's just a constant, like a spigot, that's just throwing information at all of us, that's like drinking out of, a fire hose. But it's like to be able to try to find that kind of way of saying, okay, well, how do you triage that? Like what are the things, as you mentioned, to kind of know? And what I've kind of done, and again, I'm not necessarily saying this is any inherent wisdom, but it's like, something like I said, like a Lynda or like an A List Apart or something along that lines, or frankly, even Twitter. Like you begin to just start, there's like almost like a cascade of saying, okay, I'm hearing about this scripting language. I'm hearing about this particular type of technique. I'm hearing about this new derivation of Agile, or something along that lines. And I think often, I've made this mistake before too, is I feel like I need to dive into that and learn all of it at once. And as you mentioned, that could be a really exhausting thing and probably ultimately, an unwise way of going about things, because you just will run out of time. But it's just like, the idea is to say, can you dip into it a little bit? Can you watch one tutorial video? Can you read one blog post about these particular things and just begin to start filing it away? Because I think that way, when it does come into some application where it's more actionable, maybe something you have to use on the job, or you're attending a conference, or you've got a colleague that's really interested in something, it gives you that first hook into that knowledge base, rather than just treating everything as if it's just this one big nebulous cloud that you'll never be able to digest. Because like I said, I've made that mistake of just trying to only pick one thing and try to become an expert in it. And that does help, from a specialization standpoint. But if you don't know it's immediately actionable, or you don't know it's going to be applicable in your job, you can often end up learning. Like say, for instance, again, just so I don't talk about this in such a vague way, like I was really into Flash for a while. I was like trying to learn, this is before Adobe bought it, where it was this kind of proprietary action script. This is before they kind of switched over to more of an ECMA model. And that, again, it helped me, learn a structured thinking, but completely unmarketable now, So it's just like that type of thing can be something where I think sometimes people can kind of go down these primrose paths and learn a certain amount of knowledge, which they're just not going to be able to reuse.
That is true. And there's always a risk. And that's something people talk about Meteor.js as this JavaScript framework that nobody cares about anymore, but it was pretty popular at one point. You can say the same thing about any number of technologies, but what I've noticed is that every type of activity in the software development realm that I have done, even things that I really didn't want to do at all, they have always come back to help me in something else that I was doing later, and really in unexpected ways. So it's not lost effort, but it doesn't take you directly to your destination. If you want to be a top-notch, for example, if you want to be a top-notch iPhone developer, should you use Objective-C or Swift? Now you have a choice. It's not clear, and you have to make a pick. And let's say that you said, well, Objective-C is established, let me do that. And by the time you got really good at it, everybody just dropped it and went to Swift. Then you'll be like, okay, well, it's not completely lost, but you will lose some of that momentum. And that's something we all have to live with. Another thing that I want to say is that this becomes easy. If you had somebody to talk to, if you were going to a user group, if you had experienced people who have been around the block, they have seen these cycles come and go, and you could say, this is my dilemma, that can help a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for listening.
For show notes and transcripts, visit us at mentoringdevelopers.com.